My name is Bernice Grafton, and I am 65 years old. To most people on my street in Brooklyn, I am just another older woman with a garden full of roses and a red brick townhouse that looks like it belongs to another time. They see me as quiet, maybe even fragile. But what they don't see are the decades etched into the walls of this house. The nights I worked double shifts as a nurse, the mornings I dragged myself out of bed after my husband walked away, the years I held my boys together with nothing but grit and faith. This house is my crown, my fortress, my proof that I survived. And yet the people I trusted most, my son Carlos and his wife Maria, were plotting to take it away. They whispered behind my back, already dividing what I had built, already making promises with money that wasn't theirs. They wanted me tucked away in a nursing home, stripped of my freedom, while they sold the house for $2.6 million. They thought I didn't know. They thought I was weak. But on the night of our so-called family dinner, I slid an envelope across the table. Inside was proof that everything they schemed for, the house, the money, was already gone, locked away where their greedy hands could never reach it. Carlos picked it up, his face pale, Maria leaning forward with wide eyes. Their world began to crumble as they read. Then Carlos slammed the paper down and shouted, his voice cracking with rage, "That money was for my in-laws' penthouse!" The room went silent. Forks froze in midair. Maria's face turned white. And me? I just leaned back in my chair, met his eyes and whispered the words that made his jaw tremble. "It was never yours to begin with." And that was the moment everything began to unravel. I was 26 years old when I first laid eyes on the red brick townhouse. Back then it wasn't worth millions. It was just an old, drafty place with ivy choking the walls and pipes that groaned every time you turned the faucet. The real estate agent tried to talk me out of it, said it was too much house for a single woman with 2 boys. But I stood in the doorway, the sunlight falling across the dusty floorboards, and I knew I had to have it. My husband had just left. No warning, no goodbye. One morning he kissed the boys on their heads, told me he'd be home after work, and he never came back. The bank account was nearly empty. I had a nurse's salary, 2 children who still cried for their father at night, and a heart that felt like it had been smashed into glass. That house became my lifeline. I worked nights at the hospital, 12, sometimes 16-hour shifts, then came home and sewed hems and dresses for neighbours to scrape together extra cash. I ate leftovers so the boys could have full plates. I cried into my pillow, but only after I was sure they were asleep. Every mortgage payment was a battle, every month a war, but I fought. And slowly, brick by brick, that house became more than shelter. It became my proof that I could survive betrayal, heartbreak and poverty. Years later, when the world called it prime Brooklyn property, I laughed. To me, it was never about the number. It was about the nights my boys did their homework at the kitchen table while I stitched dresses beside them. It was about the mornings I taught them to scramble eggs so we could pretend Sunday was special. It was about planting roses the spring after he left, because I needed something beautiful to prove that life could grow out of pain. That's why when Carlos and Maria looked at my house, they didn't just see a building, they saw money. And when I looked at it, I saw my soul. That's the difference. But as I sat in that house one quiet evening, sipping tea and watching the sunset stain the brick walls orange, a shadow began to creep over me. It wasn't the neighborhood changing or the ache in my knees. No, it was my own son's voice, whispering questions he thought I couldn't hear.
"Mom, do you ever think about downsizing?"
His words echoed in the empty air, settling heavy in my chest. And in that moment I felt the first crack in the fortress I had spent my whole life building. It started with small comments. Carlos would lean back in his chair, glance around my living room, and let his eyes linger on the framed deed that hung above the mantel. He tried to make it sound casual, his voice light, but I knew my son too well. "Mom, it must be a lot to keep up this house all by yourself," he said one Sunday afternoon, sipping his coffee. "You could sell, get something smaller, easier to manage." Maria was beside him, her smile sweet but sharp, the kind that didn't reach her eyes. "We just worry about you, Bernice. It's such a big responsibility. And with your arthritis, it might be safer to let someone else handle things." Safer, responsibility, downsizing, options. They wrapped their greed in soft words, thinking I wouldn't notice the hunger beneath. But I saw it. I saw the way Maria's gaze flicked across the garden, as if she were already planning where her parents' furniture would go. I saw how Carlos's jaw tightened when I brushed off his suggestion as though I had stolen something from him. I told myself I was imagining it, that no son of mine would look at me as if I were in the way. That family wouldn't circle like vultures, waiting for the old lioness to fall. But then came the slip, the moment when Carlos forgot to hide the sharp edge of his voice. He thought I wasn't listening. He and Maria were in the kitchen, whispering, their words floating through the thin walls.
She won't last much longer in that house, Maria said softly. It's too much for her. Carlos sighed. I know. Once she signs the papers, it'll all be easier.
Papers. My breath caught. What papers? I froze in my chair, the TV humming in the background, my heart thudding in my chest. I told myself I must have misheard, but something inside me shifted that night. The unease that had lived in my bones for months finally had a shape, and it was colder than winter. And yet, I stayed quiet. I smiled at them, served dinner, listened to Maria compliment my roses, even laughed at Carlos's jokes. But deep inside, a storm was building. Because now I knew it wasn't just imagination. They weren't circling out of love. They were circling out of hunger. And sooner or later, they would strike. It was an ordinary afternoon when the mask finally slipped. Carlos dropped by unannounced, saying he needed to check something for work. I was rinsing the coffee pot while he sat at the dining table with my old laptop, his fingers flying over the keys. He looked so focused, so serious, I didn't think twice about it. When he was done, he gave me a distracted hug, kissed my cheek, and walked out the door without even finishing the coffee I'd poured him. The laptop stayed open, humming softly on the table. I almost closed it right away. Almost. But something tugged at me, a quiet pull in my chest. I walked over, ready to shut the lid, and that's when I saw it. His messaging app was still open. The chat window glowed on the screen, my own son's words shining back at me. At the top, the name Maria. I should have closed it. A mother shouldn't snoop, but my eyes locked on the words as if they'd been waiting for me to find them. Maria, once she signs, it's done. My parents can move into the penthouse soon. My hands trembled. Penthouse, what did she mean? I scrolled up, my breath coming faster. Carlos, Mom's arthritis is worse. A nursing home makes sense. She doesn't need that big house anymore. The room tilted. My knees felt weak. My heart pounded against my ribs like a trapped bird. I scrolled further. Maria, she's slipping already. Did you hear how she forgot the neighbour's name last week? It won't be hard to convince her she's not capable anymore. Carlos. Exactly. If we present it as helping her, she'll go along with it. She trusts us. I pressed my hand to my mouth to keep from crying out. My son, my own flesh and blood. Talking about me not as a mother, not even as a person, but as a problem to be solved, a house to be sold, money to be spent, a cheap nursing home for me, $1 million penthouse for Maria's parents. The betrayal cut deeper than any scalpel I'd ever held in the hospital. I closed the laptop with shaking hands, the snap of the lid echoing like a gunshot in the quiet room. I sat there for a long time, staring at the walls that had once held so much laughter. And in that moment, something inside me hardened. They thought I was weak. They thought I was slipping. But they had no idea who they were dealing with.
That night I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, the glow of the street lamp leaking through the curtains. The words from that message thread circled in my head like vultures. A nursing home, a power of attorney, a penthouse for Maria's parents. By morning my chest still ached, not from arthritis, but from betrayal that cut straight through my bones. I knew one thing for certain. If I confronted them now, they'd deny it. They'd twist my words, make me look paranoid, maybe even rush their plan. No, I had to be smarter. So I began to pretend. It started small. I called the mailman by the wrong name, watching from the corner of my eye as Maria's lips curved into a satisfied smile. At Sunday dinner, I forgot my grandson's birthday by a week. Carlos leaned back, exchanged a glance with Maria, and I saw it, that little spark of triumph in their eyes. Oh, Mum, these things happen when we get older. I forced a shaky smile, nodding, letting them believe what they wanted. Inside, my stomach turned with rage. If they thought I was slipping, they would let their guard down, but pretending wasn't enough. I needed protection. I needed someone who understood the battlefield I was about to step onto, and there was only one person I could trust. His name was Samuel Cohen. We had worked together decades ago. He was a young hospital lawyer back then, handling disputes, while I was a night shift nurse. Now he ran his own firm in Manhattan. My hands trembled as I dialed his number, half afraid he wouldn't remember me. But when his warm voice came through the line, it was like a lifeline thrown to a drowning woman. "Bernice! Of course I remember. What's wrong?" The words spilled out of me like poison, sharp and raw. The messages, the plan, the penthouse. By the time I finished, my throat burned. Samuel didn't interrupt. He just let me pour it all out. Then, when my voice finally broke, he spoke with calm that steadied me. "Bernice, if you want to stay safe, you need to act first. Sell the house, move the money where they can't touch it, and set up a trust. That way no one, not Carlos, not Maria, can trick you into signing anything." I gripped the phone tighter, my heart pounding. Sell the house? The thought was like ripping out my own soul. But as the silence stretched between us, I whispered back the only truth I knew. I won't let anyone, not even my own son, steal what I built with my own hands. And for the first time in weeks, I felt something burning inside me again. Not fear, fight. The very next morning I woke with a plan. The ache in my knees was sharp as I rose from bed, but I welcomed it. Pain meant I was still alive, still able to fight. I started with the basics. Every password, bank accounts, credit cards, even the gas and electric bill. I changed them all. I set up alerts at the bank so any transaction over $500 would need my direct approval. Then I bought a small recording device, no bigger than a lipstick, and slipped it into my purse. Each time Carlos or Maria visited, I pressed that button. If they wanted to talk about me like I was disposable, I would make sure their words were captured in cold, undeniable truth. The house itself became my ally. I set up folders in my desk drawer, one labelled Documents, another labelled Evidence. Into them, I placed copies of my will, notes from my calls with Samuel, and later audio files of Maria's sugar-sweet voice suggesting I tour some retirement options. "Mum, maybe you should think about getting help with decisions. It might give everyone peace of mind." I smiled, nodded, even pretended to hesitate as if I were actually considering it. Inside, though, my fury sharpened into steel. I began practicing my role, forgetting small things, stumbling on dates, mixing up names. Every mistake made them bolder. Maria's eyes lit up when I called her by her sister's name. Carlos exhaled in relief when I asked twice what day it was. They thought they were winning. But what they didn't know was that every sigh, every glance, every whispered word was just feeding the fire I was building against them. I was no longer just a mother, or a widow, or an old woman clinging to her roses. I was preparing for war, and this time I would not lose. The lobby smelled like money, polished marble, bright lights, the kind of quiet that tells you people here pay others to worry for them. I should never have been there, I told myself, as I rode the elevator with a woman from the health centre who'd invited me just to look. But curiosity is a small, dangerous thing. It pulls your feet toward trouble like a moth to a flame. When the doors opened on the top floor and the city spread out like a map beneath us, I thought about the roses back home and how their petals catch morning light. Maria and her mother were already there, moving through rooms as if they belonged. Maria in a coat that clung like a promise. Regina holding a brochure and touching counters with a softness that meant nothing. They were small, quick with smiles, and ugly in their hunger. At first I lingered in the doorway, the impulse to storm out like a righteous thunderstorm. Instead, I let my feet bring me closer. Samuel's words, set up protections, move your money, buzzed in my head, steadying me. And the sight of them in those gleaming rooms made my hands steady as stone. They didn't see me at first.
Maria's laughter skittered through the air like broken glass. "It's perfect. Imagine this view and all the space."
We could finally have something that's ours.
My throat tightened. The words I had read on Carlos's laptop, "Once she signs, it's done," cut cold through the chandelier light. I let their talk wash over me like a tide, pretending to be nothing more than a stranger admiring the skyline. When Maria turned and saw me for a second, her smile cracked.
People like her are used to hiding in plain sight, but a confrontation in public is a different instrument. She smoothed her face with the practiced calm of someone who has practiced false warmth for years. "Bernice, what a surprise! We were just looking."
Just looking, I repeated, the words like a hinge clicking into place. I stepped forward as if to greet them, letting my cane tap the floor with soft authority. Up close, Maria's perfume smelled like a new wallet, sweet and sharp. Regina gave me a little curtsy that tried to be affection and landed like an apology instead.
Oh, Mom, this place is beautiful. Just imagine, so much easier than that old red house.
Something in my chest tightened into a cold knot. I looked out over the glass and saw the city small and indifferent beneath us. It is beautiful, but I always liked my roses better.
Of course you would, Bernice. Roses are lovely.
She half turned away, expectant, waiting for the soft surrender they had rehearsed 1,000 times. I didn't give them the satisfaction. Instead, I let a small, slow smile unfurl. You know, I came up here because someone invited me to just look. Funny how often people say just when there's more rattling behind the curtains. Maria's hand tightened on the brochure. We're not... Narrator, Vio, she began, but her voice thinned into nothing. She wanted to twist this into accident and concern, the age-old cloak of helping. Narrator, Vio. I stepped closer until I could see the tiny fleck of dirt under her fingernail, the way her eyes darted to the balcony like a cat already mapping furniture.
Bernice, do you want to know what I think? I think this place is for people who buy futures with other people's pasts.
Regina, that's Bernice.
Bernice, I heard you. I heard you whispering about a penthouse and a nursing home. I heard you talking about papers and signatures.
Narrator, Vio. The words weren't loud. They didn't need to be. There are things you say in a whisper that can break a body in half. For a moment, Maria's mask falls away, and something jagged flashes in her eyes. Panic, yes, but also terrible calculation. Coincidence. We're just...
Bernice, coincidences are for people who don't understand how the world is built.
Narrator, Vio. I reached into my purse and felt the smooth, small rectangle of my recorder. Narrator, Vio. I could press the button and make the air fill with proof. But I wanted more than recorded promises. I wanted to watch what they would do when they thought they had the upper hand, then see their faces when that upper hand was empty.
Regina. Honey, let's not. This is embarrassing.
Her voice was silk over wire. I smiled, this time without softness. Embarrassing is the word for someone who thinks they can plan a life out of someone else's grief. Narrator, Vio. The elevator hummed behind us, indifferent. People in suits glanced our way, expecting a pleasant exchange. They didn't see the clause.
Narrator, Vio. Then Maria, always quick with a whisper, said something I hadn't expected. She leaned in close, too close, and with a voice that tried to be conspiratorial, she said, Maria. You know, Bernice, there are options. Help is an option. A good home...
Narrator, Vio. Her words fell into the afternoon and into the open window of my patience. I looked at her, not the daughter-in-law I'd once welcomed with a casserole, but the woman who'd practiced compassion as she practiced theft. Bernice, help or convenience?
Narrator, Vio. That was when Regina's phone buzzed. Narrator, Vio. She glanced down, and for one breathless second I saw her eyes go blank with pleasure as she read whatever message had come through. A confirmation, perhaps. A hopeful number. Her smile, thin and human, shifted into something sharpened by greed. Narrator, Vio. I could have called Javier then. I could have yelled across the balcony. I could have dragged both of them through the light and shown the world every ugly corner of their plan. Narrator, Vio. But I didn't. I had learned the difference between immediate triumph and lasting victory. I had set files and lawyers and trusts into motion. I had a path that didn't involve a public spectacle that would let them retreat, regroup, and strike again. Narrator, Vio. Instead, I walked away. Slowly. I let the city spread beneath my feet and the penthouse lights wash over my back. Narrator, Vio. I watched Maria and Regina in the mirrored glass, two hungry figures reflected and multiplied until they looked like a small, scared army.
When I reached the lobby, my health center friend squeezed my arm. Are you all right?
Yes, I'm better than all right.
And I was, because I had seen the enemy with her hand in the cookie jar, and I had not yet taken the cookie away. I had learned their plan, their arrogance, their taste for other people's lives. On the street, the wind smelled like rain. I stood for a moment, the sounds of traffic filling my ears, and then I dialed Samuel.
My voice was steady as a bell when he picked up. Samuel, I just saw them in their future home.
What did they say?
and I heard the alert note in his voice, the kind of sharp attention that happens when someone finally names the danger. I told him everything, and as I spoke, a new thought came to me, an idea that felt dangerous and right. If they wanted proof, if they wanted to move forward with papers and signatures and the cruel certainty of a plan, perhaps I should offer them something they would bite, something that would force them to show their hands.
Be careful, Bernice. You're dealing with family. They think they can manipulate you.
I know, but family is also predictable. They always think they've seen the last page of the book.
There was a silence, then a small, dangerous laugh in his voice. You have them under observation. Good. Let them take the next step.
As I hung up, the sound of my own breath felt too loud. I crossed the street and felt the pavement under my shoes like the lines of a map. When I reached home, the roses in the garden seemed to lean toward me as if in question. I ran my fingers along a stem and felt the little thorns bite. Pain is a reminder you're still alive. Narrator, VO. I went into the kitchen and opened the drawer where I kept the folders. Narrator, VO. Inside, among worn receipts and a grocery list in Javier's childlike scrawl, I tucked the small, clean brochure for the penthouse I had taken from Maria's hand. The proof that they had looked, that they had dreamed, that they had assumed. Narrator, VO. That night, as I set everything in order and listened to the neighborhood breathe, a car pulled up outside. Narrator, VO. The light over the driveway cast a long shadow through the curtains. Narrator, VO. My heart jumped. There's a sound a liar's car makes when the engine is full of excuses. Narrator, VO. A knock at the door followed. My hands, oddly steady, smoothed my skirt. Narrator, VO. The house hummed with the familiarity of things I had stacked into place. I walked to the door and opened it. Narrator, VO. Carlos stood there, face pale, eyes rimmed red. Behind him, barely visible, someone else's silhouette shifted. Maria's, I thought.
Narrator, VO. He looked like a man who had been out at sea too long and finally found shore. Carlos. Mom, we need to talk.
I, narrator, VO. The moment held, stretched thin between us. I could hear Javier moving about somewhere in the house, the soft sound of a man who was on my side. I could hear my own blood in my ears. Narrator, VO. I thought of the recorder in my purse and the files in my drawer. I thought of the Penthouse brochure pressed like a secret confession among my papers. And I knew this was the exact second the world tilted.
Bernice, all right? Come in.
Narrator, VO. As the door closed behind him, I felt the house breathe with me. The roses outside seemed to hold their petals tight. I knew the next steps would be ugly. I knew there would be lies and raised voices and possibly things I didn't want to see. Narrator, VO. But I had seen them in the light. I had seen their plan with glass between us, and I had let them show their faces. Narrator, VO. Inside my hand, my recorder pressed like a small, patient heart, ready to tell the truth when the rest of them needed to lie. Dinner that night felt like walking into a storm with an umbrella that might rip. Javier had set the table because he said hands steady and eyes sharp were needed tonight. The candles were low, the soup simmered with rosemary, and the house smelled like garlic and memory. For a moment, I let the ordinary comfort of it settle into me. Then I saw Carlos at the end of the table, tight-lipped, shoulders hunched like a man holding back a tide, and Maria beside him, pearl earrings catching the light as if to flash like false alarms. They had no idea what lay in my pocket. They had no idea that for weeks I had been listening, recording, setting traps of patience. They thought the old woman they had been watching would finally snap on their schedule. They were wrong. We ate like people who had practiced normal for too long. Javier laughed at a bad joke about a missing sock and the boys who once crawled under our table. Carlos smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Maria offered polite comments about the soup, as if she was tasting a life she planned to sell. Between sips of wine, small talk surfaced. Javier's work, the neighbour's new dog, the roses in my yard. Then carefully, I let the conversation steer where I had planned. I asked about the penthouse visit. Maria's smile tightened. Carlos shifted, the chair creaking like a guilty hinge.
Oh, that? It was just something Regina wanted to see. Nothing serious.
Her hand smoothed the napkin in her lap like someone rehearsing a lie.
Right, just looking.
His eyes flicked to Javier once, as if asking him to believe for both of them. My hands lay flat on the table, right over the small recorder. Beneath my palm, the little device was steady and patient. I felt like a conductor waiting for the orchestra to begin. "Funny thing," I said, voice soft as linen. "I was invited to look at places too, saw some very shiny rooms." I let the words hang there. Maria forced a laugh that landed with a clatter. Carlos's jaw hardened. I reached into my purse and pulled out a small, folded envelope. It was plain, white, unmarked, the kind of thing people use for taxes or secrets. My fingers felt the edges as if reading Braille. I did not show it right away. I wanted them to feel the weight of it in the room, to hear the slow clock tick between us.
Is that?
"Yes," I said. "I have something to show you." The room grew smaller. The candlelight looked like an audience. Javier's face was all calm fury, steady, like a man who had grown up to fight for what was right. He didn't speak. He only watched me with eyes that said we had come too far to back down. I slid the envelope across the table. It moved like a small, deliberate stone, stopping at Carlos's place like a dare. He looked at it as if it were a live thing. Maria leaned forward, lips parted.
What is it?
But he already knew. I had seen that same question turned into plans on his screen. "Proof," I said. "Proof of what I've been doing." The words were not a trumpet. They were a calm bell. "The house is sold. The money is protected. There's a trust. Samuel helped. There are papers, bank confirmations, and an account that only I can touch." The room convulsed. For a heartbeat, nobody moved. Forks paused midair, and the hum of the refrigerator became a loud ocean. Maria swallowed. Carlos's face drained like paint washed away.
That's impossible. You can't. Who did you? How?
I let them scramble. I let greed panic in their eyes. It was a small mercy to watch their certainty crumble. But my action was not only to unnerve them, it was to remove their power. "You thought you could plan my life like it was a budget to be cut," I said. "You thought you could move me like a pawn and spend what I spent my life earning, not on my watch." My voice was quiet, but something about the quiet made the room listen harder. Carlos pushed back from the table as if to stand on principle. His face reddened, shame and anger dueling for control.
You sold it for how much? You couldn't have. Why would you?
"For less than the market," I said. "But it was fast and the money is safe. That was the point." I watched him try to make his anger the story. He groped for outrage and nearly found the boy he was when I tucked him into bed. Maria's eyes flashed, first with anger, then a calculation, then a brittle smile.
You could have told us. We would have helped you. We were only trying to...
"To help," I echoed. The word fell flat like a coin dropped on a hard floor. "You were trying to take."
You don't understand. You're being dramatic. We wanted what's best.
You wanted what you wanted. That's not the same thing.
His voice filled the corners of the room. I felt pride like heat. Maria's face twisted. She reached for the envelope as if to snatch it back and hide whatever color of truth lay inside. But I had already done what I meant to do. They had their proof, and now they needed to act on it.
Where is the paperwork? Who did you use? Why didn't you tell us?
"You weren't entitled," I said simply. "Not to the house, not to my life, not to decide for me." My hands were still. I felt older and more certain than I had in years. Just then, as if the night had been choreographed to a finale, my phone buzzed quietly against the linen. The screen lit with a message from Samuel. "Bank called. Someone tried to access account. Alert logged. We need to move." My heart leapt. The timing was a knife. They had not yet accepted defeat. They were testing the edges. Carlos's face went a pale grey. He stood so quickly his chair scraped the floor. Maria's perfume smelled suddenly like fear.
I didn't...
"You tried," I said. "Somebody tried to move funds earlier today. The bank called my lawyer. They logged an access attempt. Samuel says he put a temporary freeze while we sort this out." A noise made its way from Maria's throat, a mix of protest and panic. She grabbed her napkin with fingers that trembled.
Mom, please, this is unnecessary. You're making this hard. We're your family.
"Family doesn't plan your funeral while you're still standing in the kitchen," I said. My words were soft, but they landed like stones. Carlos took a heavy step toward me.
If you'll just sign a power of attorney, we can make this easy. For you.
His tone was honey wrapped around a blade. And that's when I did what I had been building toward. What I had practiced in my head 100 times. I reached slowly into the envelope and pulled out one clean white sheet, the top of a packet Samuel had prepared. I would show them some of the proof, but not everything. My thumb rested on the paper like a judge about to drop a gavel. I looked at my son and his wife, at the faces I had loved and protected, and I felt no pity. Then I looked down at the page and my mouth went dry. There, in neat type, was a line I hadn't expected. A transaction alert, a timestamp, and a name I hadn't seen before. Someone had already tried to move money in a way Samuel hadn't anticipated. The timestamp was this afternoon. My breath stopped. I realized in that breath that the play had new actors, and the next move might not be theirs to make. I lifted my eyes to Carlos, to Maria, and then to Javier. The room held its breath with me, and I slid the page across the table. They leaned forward, hungry for the rest. My hand hovered over the next sheet tucked in the envelope, the one that would reveal the full truth, and possibly the name behind this new, dangerous move. I could see the greed in Carlos's eyes like a flame. I could hear Maria's swallowed panic. I could feel Javier's rigid readiness beside me. My fingers tightened on the edge of the next sheet. Then the lights went out, sudden and complete, like someone had cut the stage in half. The room plunged into a soft, hungry darkness. Candles guttered, forks clinked into silence, and in that black, the envelope slid from my fingers and fell to the floor, its contents whispering secrets across the wood. We all reached for it. We all wanted it, but only one of us would get there first. The house held its breath. The darkness was instant and suffocating. 1 second, candlelight flickered on strained faces. The next, the house swallowed itself whole. My breath caught, sharp and shallow. The scrape of a chair rang out like thunder in the black.
The power, Carlos muttered too quickly. It's just the power.
His voice was close, closer than it should have been. But it wasn't just the power. I knew the house. I knew its rhythms, its hums, its pauses. This silence was wrong, engineered. I heard Maria's perfume before I felt her, the sweet chemical smell leaning into me as her hand brushed my arm.
Bernice, she whispered. Give me the envelope. I'll keep it safe.
Safe. That word again. Always on her lips when she meant the opposite. No, I said softly, but the sound was swallowed by the dark. Then the floor whispered. The envelope, pages sliding, catching. Someone had found it. My heart pounded so loud I thought the whole house might hear it.
Got it, Carlos hissed.
A match flared across the room, lighting Javier's face for a single second. His eyes were fire, locked on Carlos's hunched shadow clutching the envelope. The match burned down fast, dropping into nothing before I could even exhale.
Put it back, Carlos, Javier said, his voice low and steady, the kind of voice that fills a room without shouting.
You don't understand, Carlos shot back. This isn't just about money. This is about...
What's it about then? I asked into the dark. My voice trembled, but it carried. Say it. Say what it's about. For a heartbeat, silence.
It's about not living our lives in the shadow of your house and your grief. It's about building something for ourselves before we're old and empty like you.
The words stabbed, but I forced myself not to flinch. I couldn't let them taste my pain. A light flickered on. A flashlight, Javier's, cutting through the dark. Its beam landed square on Carlos's hands. He was holding the envelope, half open, the top sheet trembling between his fingers. And there it was, the timestamp, the name, the proof of someone else's hands in my accounts. His eyes flicked over it, widening with something I couldn't read. Fear, recognition, guilt. Who is it? Carlos didn't answer. He just stared at the page as if it were burning him from the inside out. Maria leaned in, trying to see, but he pulled it close to his chest. Carlos, who is it? His mouth opened, but before the words could come, the flashlight flickered and died. The room plunged back into darkness, and in that thick, suffocating black, I heard something I will never forget, the sound of paper tearing. The sound was jagged, final, paper ripping in the dark. My stomach lurched as if I'd been struck. No! The silence that followed was thick, broken only by the ragged breathing of everyone at the table.
It's better this way.
Better. My fists clenched. My chest burned. He had torn apart the one piece of proof that could have told me who was helping them, who had reached into my life with greedy hands.
Why would you do that? Why would you destroy the only evidence?
A chair scraped, feet shifted.
Because it was meaningless. Whatever it said, it doesn't matter. The truth is what we decide it is. And right now, the truth is this: Bernice can't take care of herself anymore.
You think tearing a piece of paper will protect you? Carlos didn't answer. I could hear him moving. stuffing the scraps into his pocket, shoving the envelope under his arm. The flashlight flared again, Javier smacking it against his palm until the beam returned. And in that harsh light, I saw Carlos's face. Not angry, not smug, but afraid. Afraid of me, afraid of the paper, afraid of whoever's name he had just ripped apart. "Carlos, who are you protecting?" His eyes darted to Maria, then to the door. His throat bobbed as he swallowed.
You don't want to know?
I stood, slow, steady, every joint screaming, but my voice cut sharper than a knife. "Oh, I want to know, and I will know. You can burn every paper in this house, Carlos, but the truth has a way of surviving." The flashlight beam caught Maria's face then, her lips tightening into a smirk she couldn't quite hold. And in that moment, I realized something chilling. Carlos wasn't protecting her. He was protecting someone else, someone bigger, someone I hadn't even considered yet. The house felt colder that night, even with the lamps on. Every shadow seemed to stretch longer, waiting. I sat at the dining table, hands gripping the edge, my mind spinning faster than my knees could ache. Carlos had left the room moments ago, moving like a man carrying a secret too heavy to hold. Maria lingered by the kitchen counter, fake calm dripping from every movement, but her eyes betrayed her. They darted constantly, looking for an escape, a witness, a way to rewrite what had already begun. And then it hit me, the trembling in Carlos's hands, the urgency with which he'd stuffed the torn paper into his coat pocket. This wasn't just greed or impatience, this was fear. Fear of someone beyond Maria, someone larger, someone orchestrating the whole plan from the shadows. I pulled out my notebook, the one where I'd been jotting down every detail, times, dates, phrases. I flipped the pages carefully, scanning for anything out of place. And there it was. A transaction flagged in my trust account, not initiated by Carlos, not by Maria, not even by the bank. A name I didn't recognize stared back at me. Richard Davenport. I froze. The name was unfamiliar, yet it echoed somewhere deep in my memory. And then it clicked. The developer I'd met months ago when touring that downtown Brooklyn building. The man who had smiled too widely, who had made polite conversation but asked strangely specific questions about my finances and family. The man I had dismissed as just another real estate salesman. He wasn't just a salesman. He was the puppet master. And Carlos and Maria? They were just the strings he was tugging at. My hands shook, not from age, but from rage. Years of sacrifice, my life's work, all of it had been targeted not merely by my children's greed, but by someone outside, someone calculating. I grabbed my phone and dialed Samuel, my fingers tight around the edges. "Samuel," I said, trying to keep my voice calm, "we have a new player."
"Who?" His voice was steady, but I heard the tension.
"Richard Davenport," I said, and the words landed like stones in the empty corners of the room. "He's behind this. He's using Carlos and Maria to get to me, to the money. He's dangerous."
There was a pause. Then Samuel's voice, low and deliberate. "Bernice, this changes everything. You need to move fast. He's not just after money. He's testing you, and right now he thinks he's winning."
I hung up, my mind whirling, but my heart steadied. I had faced betrayal before, yes, from family, from life, but never a predator who had hidden in plain sight this long. And now I knew. I couldn't trust anyone fully, not even the people I thought were allies. I stood, cane tapping against the floor, and looked around the house I had built. My fortress, my roses, my memories. The walls had absorbed decades of laughter, tears, and love. They would now absorb strategy, cunning, and vigilance. I had outsmarted my children before. I could do it again. But this was bigger. This was dangerous. This required precision, patience, and maybe even deception I hadn't had to use in years. I took a deep breath, letting the chill of the night settle into my bones. Richard Davenport thought he could manipulate me. He thought he could orchestrate a play with my life as a prop. He was wrong. And as I stood there, alone in the quiet house, I realized something powerful. I wasn't just defending my home anymore. I was preparing to fight a shadow, and shadows always cast a reveal when the light hits just right. The next morning, Brooklyn felt sharper. The air smelled of wet asphalt and diesel, but to me, it was sweet with possibility. I sat at the kitchen table, a mug of coffee warming my hands, thinking through every move Richard Davenport might take. Every smile he'd flashed, every question he'd asked months ago, they were all pieces of a puzzle, and now I held the edge.
We need a plan. We can't let him, or your son and his wife, catch even a hint of what we know.
I nodded, tasting the bitter strength of revenge like dark chocolate. We need to feed him misinformation, make him reveal himself, make him think he's in control while we watch the strings pull him apart. Carlos and Maria arrived later that afternoon, as expected, their faces still polished with false concern. Maria's pearls glimmered in the sun, Carlos's posture rigid with unease. They didn't know that while they thought they were approaching me, they were stepping into my design.
Mom, we just want to make sure everything's safe. You're tired. Maybe it's time to...
Time to what? Sign over everything to you? Or maybe let someone else handle my finances entirely? Carlos swallowed. Maria froze. I let the pause stretch, let them taste the discomfort of a situation where they were unsure if they were in charge. I've been thinking. Maybe it's time to bring in an expert, someone to make sure my investments, my trust, my accounts are all properly watched. Their eyes flicked at each other. That subtle exchange, greed and panic dancing across their faces, was exactly the reaction I wanted. I called Samuel, and he suggested a financial audit, completely thorough, no corners cut. Every transaction, every wire, every deposit. Carlos shifted, hands tightening into fists. Maria's lip quivered, though she masked it quickly.
Mom, that's unnecessary.
Unnecessary? Or inconvenient? That was the first crack, the first fissure in their facade. They thought they were manipulating me. They were only exposing themselves. Over the next few days, I continued to weave my web. I sent emails to Samuel with fake concerns about forgotten passwords, small transfers, and phantom checks, things designed to trigger alerts. All while, of course, keeping Richard Davenport's name out of their view. I let Carlos and Maria believe that they were still pulling strings, that they were controlling the game. And then, just as I expected, the shadow moved. A phone call came late one night. A number I didn't recognize flashed across the screen. I answered cautiously.
Mrs. Grafton, I hear you've been very busy, very clever. I underestimated you.
Richard Davenport. I held the phone steady, letting him taste the moment. And now, do we talk like adults, or do you keep pretending through your pawns?
Impressive, but cleverness only delays what's inevitable.
I smiled, though he couldn't see it. We'll see. You're the one walking into my house next, Mr. Davenport. I'll be ready, and you'll have to move through all your little helpers first.
We'll see, Mrs. Grafton, we'll see.
The line went dead, and I felt something stir inside me, a combination of fear, excitement, and triumph. I had him on my radar now, and the stage was set. I looked at the roses outside the window, sunlight cutting through the branches. You survived the winter, my loves. Now watch me survive the storm. And in that quiet, resolved moment, I knew the trap was ready. Richard Davenport was walking straight into it. Carlos and Maria were too greedy, too impatient, too reckless to see it. All that remained was to wait. The morning felt sharp with intention. Brooklyn streets buzzed with routine, delivery trucks, sirens, neighbors talking over fences. But inside my house, the air was heavy with anticipation. Every detail mattered. Every move had been planned for weeks. I arranged the dining table like a courtroom, placing the recorder subtly under the napkin beside my coffee cup. Javier moved silently around the kitchen, a shadow of readiness. We both knew this wasn't just about money anymore. This was about exposing the predator hiding behind our family. Carlos and Maria arrived early, as expected. Carlos tried to wear the mask of a calm son concerned for his mother. Maria's pearls glinted like trapdoors, her smile tight. They didn't suspect that while they thought they were manipulating me, they were walking straight into the snare. Then came the call I had been expecting. A soft ping, the voice of a courier delivering a package. An envelope addressed to me, sealed with a logo I recognized immediately. Richard Davenport's personal courier. I took it calmly, fingers brushing the paper with care. Javier watched from the doorway. He's stepped in. Now it begins. I opened it slowly. Inside were papers, contracts, and instructions, his attempt to pressure me into transferring control to him through Carlos and Maria. The arrogance in the writing made my blood boil. He thought he was untouchable, that he was orchestrating my downfall from a distance. I smiled to myself, low and patient. Every instruction, every legal demand, I copied and documented. I would not hand over anything. I would not react impulsively. I would let the trap do its work.
What's that, Mom?
I held it high, letting the light catch the edges. This? Just an invitation to see how foolish one can be when underestimating the wrong person. Maria's laugh, forced and sharp, tried to mask the creeping panic.
Bernice, maybe we should...
No, I think it's time someone outside the family witnessed everything clearly. You've been playing your game using my life, my money, my house. Carlos opened his mouth, but Javier cut him off.
You've already lost control. And now your employer is coming to see how you've been using his proxies.
I felt the tension tighten like a wire around the room. I could see it in their faces. The uncertainty, the first hints of fear. The predator, Richard Davenport, had no idea that his puppets were being exposed, that the stage was set not for him, but for him to walk into a mirror reflecting every lie he had orchestrated. I called Samuel, explaining every step, every move.
Bernice, let him think he's still in control. Everything he sends, every call, every document, log it, record it, timestamp it.
His voice was calm, a lighthouse in the storm.
He'll reveal everything himself if you let him.
That afternoon, the doorbell rang. I opened it to find a sharply dressed man, Davenport himself, perfectly coiffed, carrying a briefcase and an arrogance that could fill a room.
Mrs. Grafton, I see you've been busy.
Indeed. I've been keeping track of my affairs. Would you like to see how much you've underestimated me? His brow furrowed just slightly. That tiny crack in his composure told me everything. As he stepped inside, I realized something. The next few hours would decide more than money. They would decide whether a predator could bend a family, or whether a mother's cunning, patience and fire could finally expose the shadow, pulling the strings. And as the door clicked shut behind him, I felt a surge of power I hadn't felt in years. The game was no longer in the dark. It was in my house, and now he was inside. Richard Davenport stood in my living room, his sharp shoes clicking against the hardwood floors I had polished decades ago. Every corner of the house seemed to watch him, silent witnesses to the life he thought he could manipulate. He looked confident, too confident, but I could see the first flickers of uncertainty in his eyes.
Mrs. Grafton, he said, voice smooth, controlled. I hope we can come to an understanding. I've been flexible, generous even, giving your family guidance.
I smiled thinly, letting my cane tap lightly on the floor. Guidance? Is that what you call using my children as pawns to steal a lifetime of work? His jaw tightened, but he masked it.
Careful, he said. These are delicate matters, legal matters.
Delicate, I echoed, voice low, steady. You've been trying to steal from me, threaten me, manipulate my children, and you call that delicate? Carlos, who had been hovering near the doorway, shifted uneasily. Maria's hands clutched her handbag like a lifeline. For the first time, the illusion of control was cracking. I gestured to the recorder under the napkin on the coffee table. You see that? Every phone call, every document, every attempt to touch my finances. You've been recording yourself perfectly. You've done all the work for me. Davenport's eyes flicked toward the device, and for the first time, his arrogance wavered.
What are you implying?
That you've revealed everything without even knowing it, I said, moving closer, cane tapping with deliberate rhythm. Every scheme, every instruction, every lie you've woven into my family's lives, it's all documented. You thought you were invisible. You were wrong. Carlos's face went pale. Maria's mouth opened, but no words came. They were finally seeing the truth. The predator wasn't untouchable, and their greed had made them careless. Davenport tried to regain control, stepping forward, hands open in a false gesture of negotiation.
Mrs. Grafton, you misunderstand. This isn't personal. Business is business.
I shook my head slowly. Business? No, you've crossed a line. You think my age, my family, my quiet life makes me weak. You think my sons would obey blindly. You thought wrong. He swallowed hard, and for the first time, I saw fear. Not in my children, but in him. The predator realized the hunter had changed the rules. You see, I continued, voice rising, Carlos and Maria were your instruments. But the moment you tried to use them to steal from me, to manipulate them into your plan, you underestimated everything. My patience, my vigilance, my history of survival. Davenport took a step back, the briefcase suddenly heavier in his hand.
You can't prove...
Oh, I can, I said, pointing toward the recorder. Every instruction you gave, every attempt to access my accounts, every manipulation of my family, it's all here. And if I choose, it all goes to the authorities, but I'm feeling generous today. Javier stepped beside me, standing tall and steady, eyes like fire.
Step out of my mother's house, Mr. Davenport. You've been exposed.
Davenport hesitated, scanning the room, calculating escape, but the walls seemed to close in on him. The predator was cornered. My sons, once pawns, now stood loyal beside me, and I felt the weight of decades of experience settle into my bones like armor. And then Maria, in a panic, tried to speak.
Mom, Bernice, we can...
Quiet, I said, cane tapping. This is over. You've done enough damage. Your greed, your lies, your manipulation. Everything ends here. Davenport's shoulders sagged slightly. He realized he had walked into the one house where his influence had no power. He was exposed, naked in his schemes, and my family, my true family, stood united. Carlos sank into a chair, pale and ashamed. Maria's mouth opened and closed, unable to form words. For the first time, their world was unsteady. They weren't in control anymore. They had never been. I took a deep breath, looking from my sons to the predator who had tried to dismantle my life. You see, Mr. Davenport, I said softly, but with finality, some of us don't just survive life. We fight, we endure, and we win, always. The silence that followed was deafening. The predator, the manipulators, all trapped in the truth they had tried to hide. And for the first time in weeks, I felt the quiet of victory, as steady and satisfying as the morning sun falling through my kitchen window. But even in that moment of triumph, I knew one thing. The last chapter was yet to be written. The morning light filtered softly through the Harlem townhouse windows, warm and unhurried. I stood in my small kitchen, the scent of roses from the fenced yard drifting in through the open window. Everything was peaceful, deceptively so, but this peace was earned. Carlos and Maria had retreated, humbled, exposed, their schemes laid bare. Richard Davenport had vanished, likely nursing bruised pride and reconsidering his life choices. My sons, Javier and Carlos, had seen the truth in stark relief. Javier had chosen loyalty, steadfast and unwavering, while Carlos, though still shaken, had begun the slow process of reckoning with his betrayal. I took a deep breath, letting the weight of years and trials settle around me. I was alone sometimes, yes, but not powerless, not ever again. My home, my money, my life, it was mine. Every brick, every rose, every creak of the floorboards told a story of survival and strength. Javier poured us both coffee and sat across from me, eyes warm and alert.
Mom, he said quietly, I've learned something. You don't just survive. You make the world obey your rules when it tries to step on you.
I smiled, sipping the coffee. Sometimes, dear, you have to let people think they're in charge, even when you've already won. Patience is a weapon, as is knowledge. We sat in silence for a moment, listening to the soft hum of the city outside, the distant chatter of neighbors, and the faint breeze rustling the roses. The world had resumed its rhythm, but my victory was mine alone. I thought of the red brick house I had sold, of the money locked safely away in my trust, inaccessible to those who had plotted against me. I thought of the community centre where I volunteered, of the mornings I spent tending my roses, and of the quiet satisfaction of finally knowing I had outsmarted greed, deceit, and betrayal. A knock came at the door. I opened it to find a neighbour holding a plate of cookies, a small gesture of kindness in a city that often forgot its elders. I realized then that my life was not defined by what others wanted from me, but by the choices I made, the love I nurtured, and the dignity I preserved. Carlos eventually came back cautiously, a shadow of regret in his eyes. Maria did not. Javier and I were left to repair the fractures in our family, while the others would have to reckon with their own conscience. I looked around my modest Harlem home, the sunlight glinting off the kitchen counters, and whispered softly, as if the walls themselves could hear, "This is mine, all of it, my life, my home, my heart, and no one, not son, not wife, not predator, will ever take it from me again." The roses outside caught the sunlight fully now, golden and resilient, and in that light I understood. Life could betray and people could disappoint, but courage, cunning and love for oneself could forge victories that no one could undo. I poured myself a second cup of coffee, smiling as Javier joined me with quiet companionship. The quiet sun poured through the windows, filling the room with warmth and promise. I was 78 years old, a widow, a survivor, and finally, I was free. Bernice had won, her independence preserved, her family realigned, and the predator exposed. The house that had once been a fortress in Brooklyn now lived on in memory and strategy, while her Harlem home became a new sanctuary of peace, love, and resilience. This story closes on a simple, beautiful truth. Sometimes the strongest battles are fought not in anger but in patience, cunning, and the quiet power of a life fully lived.